It was the U.S. president there. Earlier, I spoke with Trita Parsi. He's executive vice president at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He is an authority on geopolitics from Iran to Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan. And I asked him if there is any positive news in this announcement, given that the Taliban is resurging in Afghanistan.
I think it's important to recognize that the Taliban was resurging and would be resurging regardless as to whether the United States would be leaving or not. After 20 years, we have now people saying that the Afghan government cannot stand alone for 6 months. Well, after a 20-year investment and they can only hold out for 6 months, what does that tell us? It tells us that another year, another 2 years, another 20 years will not make a difference. And that is bringing the United States to a point in which it has to decide, does it want to continue to engage in an endless, unwinnable war, or is it going to withdraw and recognize that the original objective of defeating the al-Qaeda there has been achieved and settle for that?
Yeah, the original objective, the mission of going into Afghanistan, the president said today, was to rid the country of the terrorists who had hit the United States. But wasn't that mission accomplished in 2011 when Osama bin Laden was killed?
I think in general, had it just been an objective to go after the Taliban and al-Qaeda there, it would have been achieved much earlier, perhaps even earlier than 2011, mindful of the fact that bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, not in Afghanistan. I think this is a typical case of mission creep, in which we originally went in because of al-Qaeda attacking the United States, and then it dwarfed into a nation-building project, counterinsurgency, and it's just been dragging on. This is part of the reason why the United States should be extremely selective when it comes to using force outside of its own borders, and be extremely selective when it comes to the type of military interventions that we're seeing here. Because once it is started, usually there are very, very few good options left, and you will be forced to only choose between bad options.
I heard one U.S. lawmaker today say that this war would have turned out much differently had there not been the invasion of Iraq 2 years after the start of the war in Afghanistan. And this congressman said that what happened is you had the U.S. trying to focus on two wars. Neither of them got complete attention, and you see that mission creep began, as you just said. Is the failure in Afghanistan, if you want to call it that, does it have something to do with Iraq?
I'm not so convinced by that, because at the end of the day, even if the United States had not gone into Iraq, and clearly going into Iraq did not help, but had it not gone into Iraq, it would still have been a very difficult mission, because nation building in Afghanistan is not what the United States is equipped to do. You can take a look at Iraq, see how badly nation building went there as well. The problem is that from the very beginning, the mission actually was limited to defeating the al-Qaeda, and then it morphed into something much, much bigger. Had that not happened, we would be in a very different situation today.
You know, the first questions that, for the president from reporters today were, are you handing over Afghanistan to the Taliban? Were the past 2 decades in Afghanistan, were they worth it? What would be your answers?
Well, I think the premise of that question is quite incorrect. Handing Afghanistan over to the Taliban presumes that the United States is in control of Afghanistan. The United States is not in control of Afghanistan and has not been in control of Afghanistan. That's been the problem from the very beginning. A lot of folks seem to have the impression that Afghanistan somehow is the 51st state of the United States. And now the Biden administration, or whoever, had it been Trump, would be handing it over to someone else. This was never the United States. This was their country, and the U.S. was never in control of it. I think assumptions as such has really made the conversation in the United States much more difficult about what type of rational choices it can choose between.
And moving forward, what will you tell the administration? What should we expect in the next year in Afghanistan, the government with the Taliban? And, of course, there's the role of Pakistan and even the role of China to consider.
I think it is essential that when the military mission is now ended, that the United States remains engaged diplomatically to try to help stabilize Afghanistan. It's going to be very challenging, but one thing the United States can and should do is to encourage the regional states, the neighboring states, to really step up. And their incentives to do so has now increased as a result of the United States leaving. For instance, if you take a look at what the Iranians have been doing, in many ways, the Iranians had shared interests with the United States in Afghanistan and opposed the Taliban. But as long as the United States was in Afghanistan and was seen as a threat by the Iranians did not collaborate with the United States and actually in many ways undermined the United States deliberately, fearing that if they didn't, the United States would have greater bandwidth to attack Iran. With the United States not being present there, this dynamic changes and there are opportunities for collaboration and diplomacy grows, but it takes initiative, leadership, and participation by the United States. So I think it's essential that just because the troops are back home does not mean that the diplomatic mission in any way, shape, or form should end. In fact, it should be ramped up.
Yeah, that is exactly what the president said earlier today. Trita Parsi, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.